And welcome to the European Parliament in Strasbourg for this new edition of Talking Europe. The National Front in France, the Freedom Party in Austria, the openly xenophobic Golden Dawn in Greece, or the anti-Islam party of Geert Wilders in the Netherlands, Eurosceptic and far-right parties are making big gains across Europe to such an extent that the traditional parties have begun to panic in some European states. What should Europe do to curb the rise of populism across the continent? I'll put the question to my guests. On this set, Sophie in Veld, welcome to the program. You're a Dutch MEP from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats. For long, the Netherlands was known as the most progressive, the most tolerant nation in Europe. For the past decade, though, the PVV party of Geert Wilders has really dominated the political agenda. You'll tell us why. Also on this set, Philippe Lamberts, from neighboring Belgium. You're from the Greens, you come from the French-speaking side of Belgium. On the other side of the linguistic border in Flanders, the Vlaams Belang has also been a strong political force. And of course the new Flemish Alliance, the NVA, which is not a far-right party but a separatist party, is now the largest party in Flanders. And last but not least, Bruno Gollnisch, welcome to Talking Europe. You're a French MEP from the National Front, that's the party of Marine Le Pen. I remind our viewers that Marine Le Pen got 18% of the vote in the last presidential election. 10 years earlier, her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, surprised French voters when he made it to the runoff. He was the second candidate ahead of Jospin, the socialist candidate. Now, I'll start with you, Mrs. in Veld. Why are populists, right-wing and Eurosceptic parties making big gains across Europe and in your country?
Well, I mean, you know, time will tell. I mean, I think we'll only really know in hindsight. But my explanation is that it's not exclusively a European problem, because at the other side of the big pond, we see the Tea Party with very similar, expressing very similar sentiments. And actually, if you look around the world, everybody seems to be worried about, where the world is going. The world is changing. Geopolitics are changing dramatically. ICT is changing our society in the same way as the Industrial Revolution at the time, the Industrial Revolution that led, let's say, to nation states, to parliamentary democracy, trade unions, and what have you. And now we're in a different era, and people feel that the tools they knew for the world as it used to be no longer work, and they're just very insecure. So they're looking for a scapegoat, whether it's immigrants, whether it's Jews, whether it's gay people. Gay people are increasingly a target, and also Europe.
Do you agree, Mr. Lamberts, that it's not a European phenomenon and that it's not exclusively a result of the Eurozone crisis?
No, certainly not. It's certainly not specifically European. What I believe is that there's lots of anxiety and anger in the population because, well, they feel that basically they are losing a grip on their future. And they may have sometimes the impression that basically the dominant political forces are making the situation worse by rising the inequalities in Europe. And that all fuels some resentment, and then possibly, well, either vote for, say, extreme parties that preach, well, that either finger point to someone as the culprit of all this, or preach retreating behind high and thick walls with the illusion that these can basically protect us. Well, and the other party that benefits from that is the abstentionist party, that is, people then choose to disconnect from democracy. And these are the two big dangers that we need to fight.
Fortress France, that's what the Front National is defending?
No, not at all. We are perfectly aware of the necessity of international relations, but we are fighting against globalists. In a way, I partially agree with my colleagues, even with Mrs. in Veld. The only point where I disagree is that we are not looking for scapegoats. There are problems. There are problems. Massive immigration is a problem. The free trade, complete free trade, and having, for example, the European worker competing with a Chinese worker who is paid 20 times less with no social welfare, nor insurance.
But can France alone solve these problems? Don't you actually need Europe to tackle this competition?
But the fact is that Europe absolutely did not protect, did not fulfill its promises. It's only a bureaucracy that is trying to grasp more and more power. But the people resent that this Europe is very much linked with what I would call globalism. They have the feeling of losing their identities, and after all, it's democracy.
But isn't it true, Mr. Gollnisch? I'm always a bit irritated by in a way, the duplicity of France, because France is very much what you're preaching, you know, walls around protecting France, protecting the people. At the same time, France is one of those countries which is, you know, venturing out into the world, buying up other businesses, other sectors. You're doing very well out of globalization and free trade. It's just that you don't want the competition in your own country, that's all.
No. We are not against every kind of competition, but what we want is fair competition.
You mean not in France, but only outside?
Fair competition. When, for example, when you open the borders completely, not only to internal European trade, but also to the whole world, which is the case now. For example, the French engineer has to or the Dutch engineer has to, or the Belgian has to compete with the Indian engineer who's paid 10 times less.
No, these times are over, Mr. Gollnisch. I worked for 22 years in the IT industry, and indeed, when I left IBM, and that was just 4 years ago, the differential between the Indian engineer and the European engineer had gone down from 1 to 12 to 1 to 3, and now basically they're equal. Same thing in China. So the problem is no longer there. I mean, in terms of wage differential between the emerging countries and Europe, we have basically equated the salaries. The situation still remains true for low-paid, low-skilled workers. We still have a problem, not with China, but with Bangladesh and with countries like that, with Vietnam. And there, we need to do something. I agree with that.
Mr. Gollnisch, what is so fair about France, accepting massive subsidies for French agriculture? I mean, what is so fair about that? I mean, you benefit from the European Union, and at the same time, you're trying to tell people, you know, vote for me and I will dissolve the European Union.
Please, Mrs. Silva, let me answer. First, I would say that you might, I may agree with you that to some extent the level of life of Chinese workers, well, instead of being paid, for example, the equivalent of 30 euros per month, now they're paid 100 or 200 euros, maybe, but still there is a gap. Mrs. Invert, you're perfectly right. If we renegotiate the treaties, and if we get rid to part of the system, we can perfectly nationalize our agricultural policy.
That's wonderful. So we're going to abolish subsidies for French agriculture, then we agree.
Yes, but we know we pay to the Union more than we receive on the wool, so it won't be a problem for us. Now, to support our farmers on our own.
We know that the National Front is against the European Union. You want to leave the Eurozone. What's the problem, though, across Europe? We sometimes get the feeling that the so-called traditional parties have watered down their ideologies. Sometimes they've entered grand coalitions, and it has erased their message. Is that a point that you would agree with?
I think it is certainly true that the extremist parties, both on the left and the right-wing fringes, have dominated the debate, and mainly the big parties in the center have adopted the same discourse because they think it's a vote winner to be, you know, slightly xenophobic, slightly Islamophobic, slightly Eurosceptic.
So you're telling us that the populist parties are sort of dictating the political agenda across Europe?
Not ours. Not ours. I don't feel like that. Well, I mean, of course, they are riding a wave of anger and resistance to basically orthodox economic and social thinking that is indeed borne by the major traditional parties, but we do oppose that orthodox thinking as well, but we do it in a totally different way. I mean, we are not finger-pointing or trying to basically designate the scapegoats of what's going wrong. What we are asking ourselves is, okay, how can we basically, in a democratic way, find solutions to the challenges of this century? And I'll just take one example, Mr. Gollnisch. if you really want to regulate finance, and that's a bit my specialty, if you really want to put again the behemoth, multinational financial firms, do you really believe that this is within France's grasp? I mean, the French banking law is a joke. Yes. The only way we can really put those guys under control is at the European level, because then we have the critical mass. We have what it takes to put finance back under control. And that's a way to regain sovereignty. Sovereignty over a financial sector that is
so
basically
Mr. Gollnisch, in a globalized world, aren't we stronger united? That's the question.
To this respect, Europe even is too small. We have to do it in an international basis.
But you know that does not exist.
This is interesting.
You know, I don't think that
no,
Europe
I would agree with
prevent.
you, but then G20 is not a democratic body. No. So Europe is an imperfect multinational democracy. So we need to significantly improve it, but yet it is still democratic. I mean, laws are voted by elected people in Europe, which is not the case in the G20 or whatever. So I would dream of a global democracy. We don't have that. So the second best is European democracy.
Mr. Lambert, yes, but well, I am not against any kind of international cooperation, especially in Europe. The problem is Europe, in the field of world history, is a very, very, very teeny place.
Absolutely.
Because,
I agree with that.
Where has been invented this absolutely fantastic thing that is equal rights and freedom for all nations. And the problem of the Union now is that it is absolutely destroying this European cultural heritage in the legal, economical field. And the people know that, and there were, there was promises of prosperity that will let us open our borders, and it will bring, let us have the euro, and the euro.
You know that we never said that.
You know, when euro was adopted, for example.
But it's not true, Mr. Gollnisch. It's simply not true what you're saying. It is not. It's not true. Yeah, but you're talking a lot. I'd like to say something now, because otherwise you keep talking. If ever cultural diversity has been destroyed, it's by the nation state, because they imposed their homogeneous, monolithic national identity, erasing regional identities, for example. The very essence of Europe is diversity, and that is precisely what you want to erase. Europe embraces diversity. It's actually the only place that recognizes, linguistic and cultural diversity.
I saw your reaction as well when Mr. Gollnisch said that Europe is too small.
Well, but that's the funny thing. You say, oh, we want to get rid of the European Union, and yet we want to do it at the international level. I mean, that's even bigger. So you want to give away power not to Brussels, but to Washington.
That's already the case.
But I think Philippe is absolutely right. I mean, if you go back to the start of the European integration in the 50s, we were about 20% of the world population, which was then 2.5 billion. Now it's over 7 billion. We are 7% shrinking and aging. And if you look at the challenges of today, don't you think that it would be much better to do it together? And this is the final thing I'll say, Mr. Gollnisch. This is the final thing. The so-called intergovernmental method, diplomats of national governments meeting behind closed doors, simply does not work anymore. And it is that system that you are supporting. It's not transparent, it's not democratic, and it's precisely where people feel that Europe is deciding over their heads and behind their backs. May
I answer you now, Mrs. Veld?
I'll listen.
May I?
Go ahead. I remind our viewers that this is the only democratically elected body in the EU, the Parliament.
I support the fact that the people be the master of the master of their own destiny. That's the first point, which is not the case, unfortunately, now within the Union. They are ruled by people.
Why is that?
They are ruled by people whom they don't know. Whom they didn't
But they're
choose.
democratically elected. All MEPs are directly elected. There will be elections in May.
Yes, but the interests, for example, of the British are not always the same than the French, or the French not the same than the Spaniards, and so on.
Are the interests of the French citizens in Corsica the same as in Brittany?
Mr. Lamberts.
I agree with international cooperation. For example, if the Galileo project, that to have a satellite that can challenge the American system, it's okay. Exchanging of students, it's okay. These two things do not absolutely belong to the European Union. But what we oppose is the European superstate that is destroying our own identity.
So what do you propose, Mr. Gollnisch? I know what you oppose. What do you propose? What's your proposal?
I propose international cooperation through programs on which the people can know what is the cost, what is the benefit, and can have a judgment on it.
Yeah, well,
okay, so what's the difference from now?
No, I think it's interesting because, as Sophie said, well, you say Europe is too small, but France would be big enough. I mean, I have a problem there because, well, my understanding is that France is just smaller than Europe is.
No.
So if we really want to have an influence, and I agree with that word of sovereignty, that is, if we want to have a grip on our future, it's only together that we can do that. Well, the Belgian word for that is l'union fait la force. I mean, unions make strength, and that's how we can do it.
It doesn't always work in Belgium.
Well, but I think that it does work. And the point is that sometimes difficult, but I mean, living together is not easy. It's something difficult because we are diverse, and democracy is what helps us living together. The point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, we need to give a much stronger democratic legitimacy to European decision-making. Let's face it, it's not satisfactory. And I would agree with those who say, well, how is it that civil servants in Brussels can dictate to an elected government in Greece, in Portugal, or elsewhere what they have to do? This is not working. We need to give democratic legitimacy to what is happening here. We have a European Parliament, which is the only multinational parliament in the world.
But the fact is that we aren't together. For example, let's give just an example. If the policy for foreign affairs and defense, would it have been decided at a European level? For example, France would have been compelled to take part in the second Iraqi war. Was
no, because there would not have a majority. There would not have been a majority in Europe to go there.
I don't know.
Well, we'll have to leave it there as we are running out of time. Sophie in 't Veld, Philippe Lamberts, Bruno Gollnisch, thank you very much for this very heated debate. Now, I'll return just after the news break in about 10 minutes.